Hey guys, Tim here. Good to see you guys again. Now, before we go into the details, I would like to disclose a few things. The first thing is that this F18 is my own personal wheel that I bought and paid for. Kingsong does provide me a discount, they allow me to purchase this wheel at factory price in exchange for, testing the wheel and giving them feedback. So just want to put out there, this is not a test unit that was given to me. I had that options, but I chose to purchase the wheel instead so that I can feel free to say whatever I want about the wheel. The second thing is that if you guys would like to order your own F18 or just about any other Kingsong wheel, please check out the website at kingsong.com. They now have a US warehouse, so the wheels are shipping pretty fast these days. You guys can also use my referral link, which I will leave in the descriptions. And if you use that link to order your wheel, I do get commissions for every purchase. So it's a good way to support me if you're planning to order a wheel anyway. You guys can also use my discount code, which is TimKingsong, to take $100 off your order on that website. So yeah, it's a good way to support my channel. Okay, so for those of you guys who haven't been following this wheel, I would like to give just a quick specs rundown. So the F18 have 151 volt, 2,700 watt hour battery with a 5,000 watt high torque motor. The wheel also sports 4 individual suspension shocks, 2 are air and 2 are spring-loaded. Amenities wise, this wheel have all the bells and whistles you can imagine on the EUC, smart BMS, 20 amp fast charging, GPS tracker installed inside the wheel. They have auxiliary front lighting, you have RGB tail lights, you have Bluetooth speakers that is detachable from the wheel. This wheel just have, I think, like everything a person can ask for. Now, the fact that the F18 is 151 volt is a little interesting to me because the predecessor of this wheel, which was the F22 Pro, was 176 volts. So instead of going up in the voltage like other companies, Kingsong actually rolled back on the voltage, which I totally understand because in my opinion, the 151 volt is the sweet spot where you can get the most performance without compromising too much on the range. Okay, so those are the specs. Let's now talk about the build quality of the Kingsong F18. The best way I can describe the F18 build quality is that it's a little rough around the edges. And let me try to explain this. So similar to the F22, the Kingsong F18 is incredibly rigid. What I'm saying is that the 2 shocks on each side attaches into the battery box, and it basically plays no structural part onto this wheel. You just have 2 battery box and a board tray on the top. Unlike the Veteran Links where the shocks is secure on the top and the bottom, and the battery box is attached on the outside, and that kind of allows some flex in the shells when you twist the wheel, when you turn the wheel. With this, you don't get any flex at all. It's just incredibly rigid. And the F18 not only have a rigid frame, but the plastic parts on it is also surprisingly durable because I actually have tumbled on this wheel a few times already, and the plastic have held up very well on these low speed tumble. The plastic get beat up, but there was no crack, there was no denting, it just gets scratched up, and it basically is doing its job protecting the wheel itself. Now, just as every other EUC, this wheel also have a few head scratcher in terms of just the design and the build. The first glaring head scratcher that I have is this plastic part here that's basically, it's the rear handle, but it also extends all the way down to the kickstand. And I don't really understand why there's this protruding plastic part over here that's just completely blocks you from putting your pads like anywhere further past this point. The way they work around this with the stock pad is that you can see that there is a cutout, so you can just put that over this little raised part, which is again a head scratcher. I don't really understand why this would be a thing. And it's not like you can just simply remove this part because this is the kickstand, but also the rear handle. So if you remove this, you lose the kickstand and the rear handle as well. The second thing I'm a little confused about is for some reason, the finishing of the plastic on this wheel is inconsistent across the board. So for the front bumper parts and the rear bumper parts, basically like parts that's made for protections, the plastic have a matte finish that is like slightly rugged. And so like from afar, when you look at this wheel, it looks good, but when you actually come and you touch the plastic, it feels a little toyish. But weirdly enough, while the bumper parts have matte plastic finish, the top cover and this orange part that houses the tail light is glossy and it looks and it feels really good. It has a smooth finish. It feels good. So yeah, this inconsistent finishing on the plastic of the wheel, it makes the wheel feels a little less uniform when you go and you actually touch it. And you know, it kind of diminished the value of the wheel. That being said, if you can overlook the plastic finish that I just talked about, the rest of the design actually pretty good. The pedals are similar to the S22 pedals, so you can actually replace these with the aftermarket S22 pedals. While they look identical to the S22, I think the spikes on these are like just a tiny bit higher, so they can actually grip my foot decently well. The last two things I want to talk about is the mudguard and the kickstand. The mudguard I think is pretty decent. It is similar to the Veteran Links. I do wish it is a little wider in width so that it can catch stuff from kicking up. But because as it is, you can see that there's still some water and stuff that gets splashed up onto the top. And for the kickstand, the kickstand is a little shorter. It angles up a little bit higher than Veteran Links. You won't have to worry about scraping anything when you're doing hops at the skate parks or doing big drops. That is like a real concern with the Links, and I know many of the avid trail riders with their Links actually take out the kickstands. Okay guys, so while I have you guys on the back here, I wanted to show you guys this RGB tail light here. So yeah, it is a tail light. It does turn red when you brake, and it does act as a turning signal when you tilt the wheel left or right. This RGB tail light I think is customizable. It can also be turned off if you don't like RGB. Now below the tail light we have a pair of Bluetooth speakers here. As I said before, these are detachable. They have 2 screws on the top, 2 screws on the bottom. You just unscrew that, you unplug the speakers, and then you pull it out. And that would save you probably a pound or so from the wheel weight if you don't really use the speakers. However, if you do and you play music to these speakers, the tail light will actually also react to whatever music you're playing. Now, also on the top of the wheel, we have a trolley handle, a telescopic one. The rods that they use is a little on the slimmer side. But surprisingly, I haven't had any issue trolling this wheel around. I think this is because they secure these rods really well. There's quite just minimal play to it. And it's mounted at the center, so the wheel is not gonna like twist and turn when you trolley it with the trolley handle right at the center of the wheel. Okay, so moving on to the front, we have this really big and quite impressive front headlights, as well as 2 auxiliary lights at the bottom. These auxiliary lights were, I think, the same as the headlight of the Kingsong S22. So similar to the F22 Pro, we have the power button on the headlight itself. You have a power button, and then you have a light button that will switch through the light modes that this wheel have. If you tap the power button once, it will turn on all the lights. You can see yellow, high beam, and then the auxiliary light will also turn on. And if you only need to use the headlight itself, you can cycle through white lights, which is low beam, and then high beam, which is yellow light. And then the final mode is just, everything turns on. And I've tested the light of this wheel at night, and I can tell you confidently that this is the brightest, headlight system that I've ever seen on any other wheel. One thing to mention though is as of the time that I make this video, turning on the auxiliary lights separately is not possible. But I have already communicated this with Kingsong, and they told me that there will be an update that will allow this option to be possible. Now, the charge port for this wheel is located, close to the back end of the wheel, but on the side of the wheel. So there is 1 charge port on each side, which is a little interesting because, normally you have 2 charge ports right next to each other, or just 1 charge port. And speaking of charging, I want to point out that the stock charger that came with the F18 is a 10 amp charger. So essentially the stock charger is a fast charger. One of the most advertised features on this F18 is fast motor removal. And what that means is basically, instead of the motor cable being attached inside the electronic housing along with everything else, the attachment point on the F18 is actually on the back of the wheel and hidden underneath the tail light. You don't have to open up the electronics inside to unplug the motor and slide it out. You can just unplug it from the back end, and then you can remove the motor. So this whole process simplified things a lot more, because I actually did the tire change on my wheel, and it took me about 8 minutes to remove the motor from the wheel, and I can bring it to a tire shop to have it swapped for me. For other wheels, in order to do fast tire change, what you do is you just kind of like partly disassemble the wheel to work as a shortcut to do the tire change while the motor is still attached to the wheel. it doesn't give you that option where you can just take the entire motor out and then bring it to somewhere else where people can do the work for you. And speaking of tires, the tire that I have here is a Michelin Anarchy Street 80/90/14. This is a hybrid tire, so it is just about as wide as a knobby does. And the reason why I switched out to this tire was because this stock TNT street tire here, it didn't really ride that well. The reason is because it have a really strong gyro, so the wheel want to right itself as soon as I start turning. And also it feels a little unstable at speed. I think the tire is just like too hard for it to grip on the ground like well enough. And so if you are thinking about what stock tire option you should be getting for the F18, I highly recommend getting the knobby tire, because I had the same tire on my Veteran Lynx, and because that tire is also really stiff, if you run it at a low PSI, say like 20 PSI, it will be okay, and it will also handle just as fine as any other tire. And as for tire compatibility, Kingsong claimed that the F18 is compatible with 90/100 tires, which is basically dirt bike tires. However, I do want to point out that I actually tried fitting on a 90/90 Michelin Anarchy, and it was not fitting this wheel. So I had to switch down to an 80/90, and that worked out better. So I'm thinking here that not all 90 in width tire will work. So you might want to double check before you thinking about getting a tire and changing it to a bigger tire size. Now moving on to suspensions, the F18 have 4 individual suspension shocks. As I said before, they are mounted on the center of the wheel right here. So they are center mount, 2 shocks on each side. And the shocks are mounted diagonally. So the air shocks is mounted like on the front on the left and the rear on the right. And the spring loaded is like rear left and front right. In terms of adjustability, on the top we have the preload adjustments and the rebound adjustments. Unlike the Liberchem wheels, there is no compression adjustments. However, you can change the air pressures on the shocks, at the bottom, so you can pump more air in or take out less air, and that would also directly affect the compressions of the wheel. So basically, that is the compression adjustment on this wheel. And the reason why this is so unique is that you have 2 different types of suspensions on this wheel that offer 2 different feedback. The air shocks allow the suspension to compress more and to give that cushy feeling that air shocks typically have. And the spring-loaded suspensions gives you that rapid response. So when you hit small obstacle repeatedly, the suspension can, rebound quickly. And here's me doing a 3 feet drop with my F18. And I know the footage is pretty bad, but I did this a few times and I did not feel the wheel bottoming out. But there was no harshness in the suspension. It didn't feel like the suspension just like hard stop. It slams down a lot and it rebounds almost immediately. So yeah, the suspensions on this F18, it keeps you just perfectly suspended, like how a car should be. And another great thing is that the suspensions on this wheel, I think it will work for basically everybody. So I am 150 pounds and I am running this wheel at 50 PSI, which is like the bare minimum. And I don't even bottom it out. So if you're a lot heavier than me, you can just pump the air pressure a lot more to increase the hardness of the shock, and that will also make the suspension works for you. Okay, now that the suspension talk is done, let's talk about how the wheel actually rides. So if I can sum up the way the F18 rides, that would just be confidence. The wheel responds to my input almost instantly, and the power accelerations never feel like it is out of control. And so what you end up with is just a very, easy and confident and friendly ride where, you can just pick up the wheel and get used to it very quickly, which is what I felt when I took this wheel out to ride on the first place. So in terms of seat riding, the F18 is actually tall enough that you can just sit directly on the wheel itself. However, the problem is that, the top cover, it's smooth plastic, so your butt will slip and slide all over the place as you try to turn and maneuver with the wheel. And so what I came up with is just this little 3D printed padding here that I Velcro directly on top of the wheel. It's not exactly any more comfortable, but it provides tractions, and so I can sit on it and I can tilt and turn with the wheel a lot more confidently. And in terms of torque, as I said, I haven't been able to test it off-road, but just popping a few curb, I can tell you that, you know, this wheel, it handles torque similar to how the S22 and the F22 does it, which is the wheel just gives enough power to scale over stuff, like no matter what speed you are riding at. And I'll add a footage here also where you can see me climbing up like a small grass slope. It was slippery. And I was doing like, I think 5 miles per hour. So you can see the wheel just kind of scale up this slope without any issue. There was no, you know, pedal tilting or dipping or whatever. It just climbs up. Okay, so moving on to top speed, I think this is where the F18 will start to fall short against the competitors. I was able to do a speed test. I did it at like 2 a.m. in the morning. I had 85 PUM alarm with fuel weakening turned on at the lowest level. And I was able to hit 43.8 miles per hour. That's when the wheel beeped at me. And I think this result is kind of in line with the wheel because Kingsong has already advertised the F18 as an off-road, you know, high torque wheel. It's not really like a speed monster or anything like that. So yeah, in terms of possible top speed, I think there's still more room than 44 miles per hour. That's because my fuel weakening settings was not turned on to the max, and my PUM alarm was at 85, you know, when I can turn it to 90. So I think realistically, you can squeeze out a few more miles per hour on this wheel if you are really, really interested in, you know, pushing the top speed limits. So in terms of range, I haven't really done an official range test, but you know, I've done multiple 20, 25 miles ride, and after every ride, I end up with about 70% battery left. So what that means to me is that, you know, like this wheel can do around, I think 60 to 85 miles, depending on your weight, your riding terrain, your temperatures. So yeah, guys, I think you guys can see where I am going with this. I will be riding the F18 as my main wheel going forward, and I will be selling my links. Now, I understand that the pad situation might be a deal breaker for some of you guys, but you know, I've ridden this wheel for 3 weeks with the stock pads, and I think like this is totally fine for me. So, you know, I don't have a problem with it. The firmware needs touching up, but also I've already talked to Kingsong about this, and they are working on it. So, you know, once everything has been straightened out in the firmware with all like the quality of life stuff added to it, it's gonna be great. And I think this wheel is just more future-proof comparing to the Lynx. And you know, if I ever want to change out to a new tire, I can just pop the motor out and bring it to, you know, a tire shop and have them do it for me. And you know, there are two things that I really prioritize when it comes to choosing my EUC. There's convenience and the ride feel. This wheel have the ride feel, it have the convenience, it just need a little polishing up. Right? A little bit of some shorter screw here and there, some 3D printed parts for the back, and it will be fine. In terms of who I would recommend this wheel to, I would say everybody, because I honestly think this wheel is one of the most easier high performance wheel that you can ride. You know, so if you're looking to upgrade to a bigger wheel, I think this is a good option. If you're looking to dabble into off-roading, this is a good option. And to those of you guys who love the Kingsong S22, I think you guys will like the F18 as well, because this wheel just have very similar ride feel. Like I said, it's just a confident wheel to ride, and my old S22 gave me a lot of confidence to do stuff that, you know, I wasn't ever think I would have done. Okay guys, so that's it with me and the F18. I will have a few more videos of other wheels coming down the pipeline, so you know, do keep an eye out for that. But for now, I thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys later. Bye bye now.